scanning it. And again, held down with some light weights if you really need. If it's in really good shape, then it's not going to break off if you move it. You'll be able to tell if it's paper like this. This is a really, really brittle book. If I try to fold an edge of this, it's just going to crumble right off. So anytime you would see something like that, know that if you try to open up a folded piece of it, it's just going to break off. But if it's in good shape, you can open it up, press it down and scanning it and have a lightweight if you need it. But it should be okay to do that. If you have something that's been rolled up or folded for a very long time, if there are a lot of those documents and it's been identified there are a lot of those, then it would be better to have the space to unpack all of them if you can, fold them open, unroll them if you can, again, as long as it's in good condition, and they'll have a longer period of time to kind of relax, stay open, they're more inclined to scan very nicely then. You're going to cause less damage to it because the paper wants to be a little bit more open. And then for storing it again, then it is more likely it's going to want to stay open and store nicely. So if there's a lot of them, you might want to do it a little bit ahead of time. But again, you have to be careful about not mixing up documents, mixing up the sequence of the documents, and just having the space to lay those out. Paper and parchment, that works great for photos. If you came across a rolled up photo or a rolled up or folded photo or something, I would ask your supervisor about that. Those can be a little bit trickier. So you can see here that both of these were rolled up documents. The one on the top is actually a little bit brittle, so you can see the giant crack in it as you try to unroll it. We do try to use weights to help assist with the process, but the top one is something that we would have to humidify if we actually wanted it to flatten. It's not going to open up without further damage. The one on the bottom right there, you can see they're using glass weights. They are using paper to sort of block some of the weights coming in contact with the document. It could be text under there, it could be something they just don't want the weights to come in contact with. But they're just using the weights to help them sort of open it up very slowly, see how it's going to lay. The document on the bottom does look like it's pretty long because you can see how much of it's rolled up there. So you may only be able to do a section at a time. You may have to open it up, put the weights on it, let that sit for a little while until it is relaxed and is willing to stay open more. And then move along and do another section of it until you can get the whole thing. And you might be limited by space. This document could be 6 feet long, and you're not going to have a 6-foot table to be able to work on. We use coal mine maps at work, and some of those are 30 feet long, so we can only work with certain bits of them at a time. If the documents have been folded and rolled up for most of their life, they might be really resistant to being opened and flattened, especially if the paper is brittle. You have a higher risk of causing damage, especially if the paper seems to be weak along the creases. Again, ask your supervisor if you aren't sure or if something seems really difficult to open. You can see with this map, it had been rolled up and stored this way for years and years and years. When you open it up, it has lots of cracks.
Those big mighty cracks?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. If you are opening something that you think might be resistant to it, go extremely slow. Don't be in a hurry to unroll it. Listen for sounds of cracking. You want to stop right away if it sounds like the document's cracking. If you're unrolling it, watch for mountain peaks. You can kind of see them on here. That just means that they're starting to crack and pop up for the whole document.
Mountain peaks, I love that.
Yep.
Would you ever, is there any times when you would recommend something be stored rolled up?
I mean, usually it's more of a space concern if you don't have the space for something to be opened up and laying flat. I mean, with our coal mine maps, we do have a lot that they have to stay permanently rolled up because.
Is there some way to minimize the damage?
A lot of it depends on the quality of the paper. If we've had ones that are brittle that we've humidified and we've mended and that has helped it to relax, we have it flat and then we roll it back up. The trick is you don't want to roll it up as tightly. You want big rolls. You want to keep it stored with protection around it. If you can store it on like a hollow core, something that's solid, so it's not sagging in on itself. That's better. You can have an outside covering. Sometimes we'll use mylar wrapped around it. Sometimes we use linen or muslin wrapped around it.
Around each page or just around the
Just
outside?
around the outside of it, and then you can kind of tuck that in on the end so it's not getting any hair in there. And then if you want to make sure, to make sure that doesn't unroll, you can use just basic cloth ties, like what's in this box, to just kind of tie around it and make little bows. So, so there are ways to kind of minimize the damage if it does have to be stored up, so rolled up. Fastenings. So there are a lot of different types of fastenings you could come into contact with. There are all kinds of metal fasteners. You know, you've got staples, you've got metal paper clips, you've got metal straight pins, you've got metal little plugs. There's all kinds of fasteners that people have used. There's plastic clips, there's adhesive tapes, there's just adhesive. We've come across documents where people have just glued a pile of them together. So you could come across any type of fastening. They could cause problems with the document. You might notice that there's already damage done to them. You could come across rusty staples, adhesive stainings. The adhesive might turn a darker and darker color. Documents that are clipped or pinned together might not lie flat, so you might have trouble scanning them because of the fastening that's in it. Information or text could be obscured depending on how it's fastened. They could have placed something over some words and then it's no longer legible. In this case, you really have to look at the number of words and significance of the words that are affected to decide what further steps that you should take. If if it's just a page number or something insignificant that's going to be lost, well, that's not really a big deal. If you have a damaged document that's fastened to other documents that aren't damaged, that's going to be a little bit trickier to deal with. You're going to have to be much more careful than usual. And finally, if it does have metal fastenings in it, you have to be aware that that could scratch the glass of the scanner, and then that could cause a permanent mark that's going to show up pretty constantly with all of your scans. Even though the fastenings could cause problems, you don't want to automatically assume that you should remove them. The costs and the risks have to could outweigh the benefits. By handling them appropriately, you still have a chance of getting a good scan from it versus perhaps doing further damage to the document by taking out the fastenings. These are just a few pictures. There are all different kinds of rivets that could be placed in the document. Rivets are a little bit more difficult to remove from the paper. You do have to have specific hand tools, and it's just a lot trickier. And it is going to leave a gap in your document. It's going to take a whole while. These little pins, they're not so bad. You might be able to remove those by hand. And then the metal fastener at the bottom, those are pretty easy to remove as long as the paper isn't extremely brittle. So the two on the right aren't too bad, but the rivets are extremely difficult. Damages, so you can see this one on the top right has started to rust in the documents. The document itself got wet, and the binder clip is just destroyed. Same thing with the rusty staples here on the bottom and on the left, or rusty paper clips rather. Unless you specifically know that you're dealing with stainless steel staples or paper clips, this could be the damage that happens to them. The impact of removal. The fastenings are there for good reason though. There's a reason that somebody put that fastening in, and that's usually to keep associated documents together, to keep them in the right order, and by removing them, you risk possibly losing papers that go along with it, losing the original sequence or the original arrangement to the documents, and again, context or meaning to the collection could be lost as a result of that. Fastened documents overall tend to be easier to handle than loose documents, especially if the sheets happen to be of different sizes. Handling during scanning could be easier if you left the fasteners in. Long-term preservation could be affected if removal of fasteners means that some sort of protective cover was attached to it, and now that that's gone, the documents are no longer well protected. If we don't really have something set up in place for rehousing it, then you're left with documents that might not be able to withstand a lot of the contact it had before. Fastenings could also be a part of the original document, and you want to avoid removing them if it could adversely affect the authenticity of the item. I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but if that was like the first staple ever invented is in these documents, well, if you take that out, well, you've just destroyed a part of the document that's inherently valuable. So those are things to consider. Scanning could also be difficult with the fastenings in place. As I mentioned, it could scan the actual, or it could damage the actual scanner itself. And you don't want to introduce fresh creases into the document because you're folding back pages to scan them. Weights, again, relying on weights. The weights should be clean. You don't want them to mark the document. Small metal or glass weights or snake weights. Snake weights are longer ones that are covered in something with cloth material that you could lay on top of the document. Could help to prevent creasing any of it. If you are trying to scan documents that have been fastened together, you're going to run into the problem where you might be able to see images behind it during the scan, and that's going to really affect the quality. So what you might have to do then is, it's called masking off, is you might have to just take a blank piece of paper, stick it behind your document and scan it that way. And that way, if you have these folded over, it's not going to show up. You'll just have your document. So things to consider. You might also not be able to keep the weights from appearing in the image. That's not really going to be as big of an issue with the flatbed scanner because you are scanning it upside down. If you had an overhead scanner and you have weights down, that's something that you would have to think about, and then you'd have to worry about cropping the image if you're able to do that. But with the flatbed, you don't really have to worry so much about that. If you are working with something that is fastened, but it's too large or it's too heavy for a weight to be able to do anything of it, I mean, we use covered bricks in lab, but you can't really take a giant covered brick and stick it on something on top of the scanner. That's a lot of weight. So in those instances, you would have to consider more either removing the fastening or just trying to be very careful about using your hands to hold it down and seeing how the scan turns out. Removal. If the situation does seem to warrant the removal of the fastening, the best way to really decide is if you should do it or not, or if you're capable of doing it or not, is really depending on how easy it's going to be to remove it. The more difficult it looks like it's going to be, probably the more damage it's going to cause the document. Paper clips and possibly even staples could be removed by regulars, student workers, scanning technicians, whoever. If it can only be removed by using hand tools, these are hand tools. I've got spatula. We've got different sizes of these galore. We've got, these are called bone folders. Some are made of Teflon, some are made out of actual bone, and again, these come in all different shapes and sizes. If you really feel like you have to rely on items like these, it might be a little too complex to take out the fastenings. You might have to leave it in place and try to work around it. Also, you might have to consider if the item is going to be refastened. It's just something to keep in mind that if it's not going to be, what's the chance that this document is going to get out of order or lose value, and what's the chance that that could really affect the collection? If there's only 2 pages to it, well, that's not quite such a big deal. But if there's 20 pages and it's sort of a mixed match of all sorts of information, then if you aren't able to refasten it, that could be a problem. Removal should be done by hand. And again, you want to take care not to actually tear the documents. It's going to be a slow process. Don't try to rush it to get done with whatever box or folder you're working on.